Well, folks, the new Hearthstone meta is starting to take shape, and it looks like we finally have a new class on top of the standings. Wait, what? No, Shaman? Wait, Shaman is back on top?
Hey, buddy, watch this.
Yeah, so as you can see here from the meta report over at hsreplay.net, it turns out Galakrond Shaman is pretty much far and away right now the best deck in Hearthstone, and some variants and other Shaman lists are littering the top of the meta. So yeah, Shaman is still on top. That said, we are going to talk about the different versions of Shaman in this video, along with a handful of the other decks here near the top of the meta, discussing what you can play, what sort of things might help you hit Legend, or at the very least have some fun climbing. So this is, the top, 5, 6, 7 decks in Hearthstone right now in the early Descent of Dragons meta. So up first here, let's take a closer look at Galakrond Shaman, the very best deck in Hearthstone. And you'll see here the core and popular cards. This is not exactly a deck list. I will include some of those in the description below. If you want to grab the list to play these, I would encourage you not to play this one in particular, but at the very least, we're going to explore what this deck is all about. And really, it all boils down to the new Galakrond card, which is just perfectly synergistic for what Shaman is trying to do. They love getting out a lot of early tempo and pressure and going crazy with rush minions, and this guy does that really nicely. In particular, empowered by some really nice invoke cards, like you've got your Shield of Galakrond, which is fine, but then you've got your Corrupt Elementalist, which is super strong, summoning 2/1 elementals with rush. This just allows them to really create swings on board, and eventually set up for this world where Galakrond just overwhelms with 8/8s, and then guess what? They get to do it all again with Shudderwock, meaning they just keep coming at you like crazy. Now, you'll note here, the actual highest win rate version of Galakrond Shaman currently is not running the quest, but as we saw on our list, there's a quest variant as well that doubles the battle cry on all of these invokes, and even often on Galakrond itself, summoning you up to 4 8/8s. But it turns out just this version is good enough, just creating that pressure and overwhelming your opponent with just stuff and dudes and tempo and these really big late game bombs often wins you games. And as you'll see here, they really don't have a bad matchup. Their worst matchup is actually just Galakrond Shaman, which is, going to be a 50-50 win. And they beat everything else. Everything else they have a favorable win rate against. It's just all green here when you look at matchups, in particular on HS Replay, which is absurd. We've never had a deck without an actual counter. There's just no real way to beat this other than just being better at playing Galakrond Shaman. So if you play other things, there's a good chance they're going to beat you more often than not. Now, of course, you can win games. You can take those 45%ers, but on average, you're going to lose out because this is, right now, significantly the best deck in Hearthstone. Now, as we head back into the tier list here at HS Replay, there are a couple other versions of Galakrond Shaman. I don't want to spend too much time diving into these. Basically, play Galakrond, play stuff, either support that with the quest, or support that with Overload, or just support that with other good Shaman cards. It doesn't really matter. As long as you have Galakrond going, you're probably going to be winning some games. We even built a Highlander Galakrond Shaman myself that was really good as well, so you kind of can't go wrong. So we'll move into some other archetypes here. Next up, exploring Pirate Warrior, another deck I have to admit I'm not really excited to see in the meta, but at least it's not Shaman. And this was one we all sort of proposed and knew was coming. It looked really strong because we saw cards like Ankar in the mix, just, real value on this one. Drawing stuff while still creating pressure in the early game as a weapon synergy card is really powerful. Now, you'll note here, these lists aren't currently running Galakrond. There was a Galakrond Pirate Warrior theory, but Galakrond currently getting cut just for the raw efficiency of pirates. It turns out you don't really need it. It's a little slow. Some of the invoke cards in Warrior are awkward, so you're better off just building towards raw pirate consistency and just more, pressure on things like Leroy Corcoran for that raw damage output, and just good cards too, like Restless Mummy, Faceless Corruptor. These are just great at addressing boards and creating even more on-board swings and pressure. And then you got new key units too, like Skybarge, Sky Raider, just fusing all of this together. Certainly the Parachute Brigand gets you some early swings as well. And it turns out, with Ankar in the mix, losing a hand that dumps a bunch of Parachute Brigands isn't all that bad because you just reload so successfully with Ankar and things just keep flying. So very fast, a very aggressive deck. Certainly has some weaknesses to Galakrond Shaman, but as you can see here, still a lot of green. It is beating currently most of the meta just because of that quick early game efficiency and damage output. I do think this one will lose some steam over time as the meta starts to refine, but for now, this is a very fast and very strong deck. Moving on to our next deck here, we have Secret Highlander Hunter at high tier 2. And no real shock here because Highlander Hunter has been a really successful archetype basically since we saw Bran introduced, and certainly Zephrys supporting it also. And this one just takes a lot of that core that we already knew from Highlander Hunter and just adds in really good cards. For instance, Dragon Queen Alexstrasza, of course, new Highlander support card, fits in really nicely. You've also got just some powerful things like Phase Stalker here supporting the secret package that was already in these versions of list, right? So that's just a good addition to the deck too. And then we see some other popular cards, not necessarily core to the list, but still showing up. Things like Dragonlaw Poacher to address, just all the dragons out there right now. You've got Varanus, which is just another really strong mid-range minion that has some positive interactions with things like Spring Paw and even Explosive Traps. And Dragonbane making the cut too. Just a good, 3/5 body that can do some extra damage. And this deck does still like pumping out damage with those big brand hits and all the pressure that it can create. So some nice new additions to the list here from the new meta, but ultimately still much the same deck that it was before, so no shock that it's finding success. But you take a good deck and you add even better cards to it, it just gets better. And I think this is a really fun way to play right now, and successful one certainly too. So I would recommend a lot of people give this deck a shot if all the legendaries aren't too intimidating and you've already gathered some of these. This one's a really, really good choice. Now, as we head back into the list here, I want to take a look at Quest Hunter. We've got ourselves a nice new addition to Quest Hunter, which is Shuma. A lot of people didn't give this card any credit, so I think it's the worst legendary in the set. I was a little higher on it. I had said, keep an eye on this one. I think there's a couple ways to play it successfully. I think I focus more on Token Druid than Quest Hunter, but here we are in Quest Hunter with Shuma actually doing work, helping this deck gain even a little more strength. There's not too many new things happening here. You got Clear the Way showing up in lists, and Diving Griffin also popping in here, just helping you move through your deck a little faster. But again, much the same core, just with a few key components, but I just wanted to focus on Shuma and his inclusion, which is amazing. This is another really fun deck to play in Hunter that's not Shaman or Pirate Warriors, so I would encourage people to give this one a shot, especially if you open Shuma and you don't know what to do with it. This deck will save you. So now back at the meta report here, we're scrolling down, and we don't have too many more decks to look at, but I do want to talk about Galakrond Zoo Warlock. This is one I too found some success with and enjoyed quite a bit, and I think I underrated pretty significantly because it turns out Galakrond and the ability to just keep summoning demons over and over again will eventually overwhelm a lot of decks and opponents. And if you build your deck to support that really nicely, you can do some crazy things. So, Sea Giants, for instance, are awesome. Knife Jugglers go really well. Support via Grim Rally and Fiendish Rites to follow up on those wide boards can do some work too. There are a couple lists. I'd say the predominant list right now is the one running Valdris Felgorge and Knife Juggler. I've had a list that is very similar in win rate right now that does not include those pieces and has a couple other different things happening. But I think this one will take the spot as the go-to zoo list. It's got a tiny advantage right now over my list, although I think mine could be refined a little, so I haven't given up yet on the non-Felgorge version. But as you can see here, just some really good new Invoke cards to support Galakrond, powerful stuff like Kronks. You got the Faceless Corruptor in this deck, like pretty much every other deck. That's one thing we need to add into mine. And it turns out this works out really nicely, and this can be a powerful, good way to win. You don't beat Galakrond Shaman much here in this particular one, but still a good, successful deck that's on the cheaper side of things, I have to say, compared to many, because you got the Galakrond for free, so it's really just Kronks and maybe a Valdris to craft here. So this could be a really good semi-budget option, despite a couple epics being in there. This is a pretty cheap list to play. And then there's one last deck I want to talk about here. We're going to kind of skip over Highlander Dragon Hunter. I think it's solid, but shares a lot of similarities to our previous Highlander list. But I do want to take a look at Galakrond Death Rattle Rogue, or alternatively Death Rattle Rogue. There are, again, two sort of versions popping around out there. Let me reload this. We got to hang up there. And they're both really cool decks, right? So the idea with these is essentially to utilize the new card Necreum Apothecary, which is really, really powerful. It turns out, cheating out some big death rattles early in the game. Just be sure to combo it. Don't forget it has combo. Goes a really long way, and when you put that in kind of a tempo rogue shell with all these things like Edwin Van Cleefs and Evil Miscreants, you've got yourself a cool deck that can do some silly things. All the lackeys just give you like just ridiculous resource advantage. You just keep making lackeys because of Galakrond's hero power and invoking it. Then you've got Heistbear and Togwaggle shenanigans for all those lackeys. You've got some big mid-game spikes when you summon 7/7s off your Necreum Apothecary. You've got Necreum Blade to cheat out even more 7/7s. This deck just does a lot of cool stuff, whether it plays like Tempo Rogue, whether it plays like, a Death Rattle summon deck, or whether it has late-game shenanigans off Galakrond and Heistbear and Togwaggle. It just finds multiple different angles to win, and I think it's a really cool deck. One of the more fun ones to see finding success, because Death Rattle Rogue has always like kind of been right on the fringe of being good, but never got there. It seems like this deck might have finally gotten it over the hump. Now, there is also a non-Galakrond version that we can take a look at as well real quickly, because they do have some slight differences in how they're structured. It's still about the Necreum Apothecary core, but you just have even more kind of tempo rogue stuff and less lackey generators. So you have, your Karen Bloodhoofs in here. You squeak in a Leroy, for instance. You make more room for a Flick Sky Shiv and just some more tempo cards as well. So similar lists in a lot of ways, but this one's probably more like kind of true core rogue, just without the Galakrond. But both are viable right now, very similar in win rates. I personally prefer the Galakrond one. I think Galakrond and lackeys are really, really fun. So I would lean that direction if I were you, but both are suitable options to climb currently in the meta. And there we go. I think that's going to wrap it up here for the decks I want to discuss in depth. There are certainly a lot more good decks on this list. There's a lot of things that are very close to good, including, Highlander Mage is looking really good right now. There's some cool new mech hunter stuff happening. There are some token druid decks. I think our win rate's actually considerably higher than this one, so that may still get refined up a little bit. You can play Galakrond Warrior. You can still stick to Holy Wrath Paladin if you want. Pure Paladins just barely clinging on here. Old Quest Shamans hanging on. If we look down to tier 3, there's some pretty significant and interesting things to note, like Hand Warlocks. Not quite there yet. I want it to be. Same said for some Dragon Paladin stuff, Highlander version. If we go even farther, Cyclone Mage, it turns out isn't working out all that well. Control Warrior struggling. Quest Ruin has fallen off hard. There's no Dragon Paladin list currently lighting things up. So, and Priest, I guess, too, is in a tight spot. There's really no Priest decks at all in tier 1 or tier 2. So a really interesting meta breakdown early now. Just to be warned, if you make any crafting decisions, it's still pretty early in the meta. Things can change. Somebody can discover a magic list that resets everything. For now, though, Galakrond Shaman certainly looks like the strongest, most viable deck, although I'll warn you, I think there's a really good chance it gets nerfed. This is pretty demonstrably better than anything we've seen in the past, and that is an indication that nerfs might be on the way. I don't know when that would happen. I don't have any inside info, but if you do craft some support cards for this deck and only like Galakrond gets nerfed, you might get wrecked a little bit when it comes to dust, so be careful. It's definitely powerful. I don't really want you playing it if I'm being selfish and greedy either, but just be warned, your dust could backfire a little bit, because I wouldn't be shocked if this one gets nerfed, particularly after all the hate the dev team got for not addressing Evolve. I think they're going to probably try to rush out a balance patch before Christmas. That's the same thing we saw with Rosticon's Rumble, because they kind of take breaks, I think, kind of over the Christmas period, and if they don't do it immediately, then they might not get a chance for like weeks after that. So just be warned. I hope actually this does get nerfed. We'll talk more about that in future videos. All that said, big time shout out to hsreplay.net for getting this data together already and providing such a great source to break this down for us. And I hope you guys enjoyed this look at these decks and this discussion. Certainly fun for me to see what's going on. That said, if you enjoyed this video, of course, please drop the subscription. We're pushing really, really close to 100,000 subs. And can't wait to get there and get my button and stuff from YouTube. That's going to be a lot of fun, but also just more fun Hearthstone stuff to talk about, and more anger to shed and share about Shaman. So share your thoughts on these decks. What's working for you? What's not? In the comments below. Thanks much for watching, and until next time, game on.
Dragons take flight above the ice and snow, high in the sky.